Welcome to the Author's Edge radio show with Guy L. Freer and Bob Price. Now, their show airs nationwide on the My Genre Radio Network, Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. Each week on their show, they help authors create books that transform our lives and imaginations. Through radio excellence, they create a unique community resource, one that promotes, connects, and fosters a sense of well-being. Gael and Bob maintain a focus on sharing books, publishing, marketing, and writing solutions. They serve listeners by providing outlets for their creative skills and energies, and they help them flourish in the competitive marketplace. Their weekly show provides intros, writing spotlights, helps you in promoting your book, your writing, your publishing, your marketing tidbits, and much more. Okay, audience, here's Gael and Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Why, hello.
You've been gone for a while. For a long, long while.
Well,
For a long, long, long while.
you drive me crazy.
As my father would say, that's a short trip and you'll be traveling light.
Yes. Well, I traveled with my sciatica.
With your sciatica?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, today we have a very interesting gentleman.
Who do we have today?
We have a Greg Edmondson who grew up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. He has been a working artist for over 40 years. His work is informed by a lifelong interest in the natural world, our collective experience as a part of that world, and the inadequacy of language to fully describe that experience. Greg earned a BFA from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and an MFA from Washington University in St. Louis. He is the recipient of numerous awards, including Fulbright and DAAD fellowships to Germany and residency fellowships from the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, the Santa Fe Art Institute, and
Künstlerwerkstatt Lothringerstraße in Munich. Yeah.
in Munich. Okay. Greg currently lives and works in Missouri. So, what was growing up? I mean, you know, this whole thing was what was growing up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee like?
I didn't realize how unusual it was until I left and went away. You know, wherever you live, everything seems normal. But Oak Ridge was one half of the Manhattan Project. So it was an artificial town built simply for that. It was a no-fly zone. I'd never seen an airplane, a passenger plane, fly over. You couldn't fly over Oak Ridge. There were machine gun turrets at the entrances to the town. There was an air raid siren that went off every day at 5 o'clock. So as little kids, it's just you go play, but when you hear the 5 o'clock siren, it's time to come home. And I thought everywhere in America had a 5 o'clock siren, you know, because I thought all this stuff was normal. But it's, you know, it was a town of 35,000 people, and it had the 3 government installations, the breeder reactor. And so there were massive green belts and just, you know, so we had a huge woods behind our house, you know, we had creeks and ponds, and
Right.
it wasn't quite like growing up in the country, but
It wasn't
you know,
quite
it wasn't,
growing up in a city either.
it was not the year I graduated from high school, they completed the inner belt that connected Oak Ridge to the interstate going to Knoxville. The day it opened, someone hit a bear. So that gives you some indication that this was not a very urban
No.
scenario.
But nothing blew up.
No. Thank goodness. That would have
Yeah.
happened before we moved there when I was 18 months old, and you know
And you lived
that-
there your whole life,
I
right?
went through high school. You know, I went all the way through school in Oak Ridge.
And
then
how many
moved to
people were in your
Knoxville.
graduating class?
There was only one school in town, so 670 some. It was
It wasn't fairly large.
Yeah, you know, there were multiple elementary schools, 2 junior highs, and one. There was also a shul and a Catholic, you know, a private Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
But and since I've left, the town the elementary schools have been slowly closing. The town is aging out. There aren't that many young people. The hippest, hottest bar in town when I lived there is now an old folks home. So that it was a hotel.
Oh my gosh!
So that tells you where Oak Ridge is. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I might
days.
check in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'd
Yeah.
be perfect for the place.
Sadly, the bar wasn't, they no longer serve drinks.
Oh, they
sadly.
no longer
Yeah.
serve.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
Yeah.
then forget that.
Yeah,
You're not
forget
going.
that,
They
yeah.
don't have scotch there.
oh, okay. Well, cuts me out.
So, how did Oak Ridge shape your artistic vision?
Well, I don't, I don't know if Oak Ridge per se did, but growing up, I'm a hillbilly. My mom's from Coal Creek, Tennessee, and my dad's from Goose Nest Township, North Carolina. So growing up in a place with that kind of access to, to the woods, to wildlife, we were constantly rescuing, baby animals. When I was we'd find a baby squirrel, a flying squirrel, baby crow, we were nursing all these things back. So and I spent my childhood turning over rocks and rotting logs to see what might crawl out. So that, that influenced my outlook on the world, I think.
What?
Yeah.
It's my turn. It's still my
Oh.
turn. Don't take my turn. What inspired you to become an artist?
That's I'd been that kid who drew, like an old friend of mine who's a musician. Someone asked him, like, man, how'd you get so good at that? He said, well, I discovered I was good at this at a time when I desperately needed to be good at something. So like I'd been the kid who could draw and had done that forever. So, if you were running for student council president, you tap me to go paint. But I didn't know anything about art. I'd never, I didn't know. I knew who.
Did you take art in school?
I took some drawing and painting, but I started college as a biology student, was really unhappy with that. I wanted to be Jane Goodall, and it was the 70s. So they were really hardening the soft sciences. And
Right.
you could study an aspect of the endocrine system of something, but you couldn't say you wanted to go out in the wilderness and
paint.
she was never supported by a college or university. She was supported by National Geographic. So I didn't know what to do, but it was art history that really convinced me, because that, it was the first time I saw people from 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, grappling with some of the same kind of questions or crises or what, it was like, wow, I didn't feel like a lone weirdo anymore. I felt like maybe I was part of something with a long, like
You were
people
part
before
of
me
a
had
group.
done this. So
Yes. you
There were
part of
other
Yeah.
people.
yeah.
other people like me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
There were, I'm not a lone weirdo. There have been weirdos all along. So
What's your earliest memory of creating a piece of art?
I mean, that's because, I made drawings. Like I was always drawing. My dad got to know the publisher of the local newspaper. So, in those days, at the end of a roll of newsprint, they just tear it off and stop so it never ran out on the press. So they just gave him rolls of newsprint, and I'd come home from elementary school and, tear off a 5-foot chunk of newspaper and blank
drawing.
newspaper and start drawing.
Wow.
So these weren't works of art. I was drawing, I was way into dinosaurs, which was weirder then than it is now. So, I was, drawing like crazy things, battle scenes, spaceships,
But you were
monsters
drawing.
dying, but
It was
just drawing all the time. Yeah.
drawing all
So,
the time.
So, I mean, I didn't really, and then, if you've been that kid that draws all the time and everyone thinks you're good at it, you're the kid who can draw, you think that's going to be a big advantage in art school. And you're like, oh shit, maybe, wow. It's like, I don't know half what I thought, yeah. So
How did your Fulbright scholarship influence you?
well, that was, in so many ways that I had been to Germany for 7-8 months prior to the Fulbright. You can thank me now for writing DAAD, because that's Deutsche Akademisches Austauschdienst. So
Wow.
it's the German.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that was
Yeah,
not.
Jawohl.
Yeah.
Jawohl,
Yeah.
yeah.
Volt is. Yeah. That's
So
about as
I've
close as
been
we're
there.
getting.
I straight out of grad school, I got to go to Cologne, Germany, which was at that time in 1985. It was more the image we had of New York as a visual artist than New York was. In fact, a lot of New York galleries, if they had an American artist who had a show coming up, they
Go to
flew
Cologne.
them to Cologne because it was cheap to run them a studio and house them there, way cheaper than it would have been in New York.
In New York.
So I met all these Americans when I was there. But the Fulbright, you know, I ended up spending like a year and a half in Germany. That was just amazing. And Munich, Cologne was like a center for the art world. I didn't know what to expect of Munich, but Munich is like, it's both the Detroit and the Los Angeles of Germany. You know, automobiles are manufactured not far from there.
Uh-huh.
And Munich is the home for television, theater, film production. So it was like, you know, it was just remarkable.
Wow.
And I got to travel, but as of all the Fulbrighters, we'd have these meetings every, you know, and they kept saying that, you know, well, we expect in the next 25 years for the Berlin Wall to come down and Germany to be reunited. But nobody saw it coming in, you know, in the next few months. That was
amazing.
So we got to go, you know, we spent New Year's Eve of 89-90 at Checkpoint Charlie, you know, at the Brandenburg Gate, in a sea of people, you know, from all over the world, because this was like, you know, this was absolutely
that must
crazy.
have been an amazing experience.
It was a trip. But then within a few weeks, Russia rolled into Latvia with tanks and Tiananmen Square. You know, it's like, oh yeah, everything's back. You know,
Back to normal.
It didn't take
Yeah.
any time for everything to go right back to normal.
Yeah.
So,
So what, you got a DAAD fellowship. So kind of explain that and tell us, you know, how that affected your work.
Well, I was a graduate student. You know, I was here at WashU, and I'd been fascinated by it. There was a collection, like a collective actually, of young artists in Cologne, Germany. They called themselves the Mülheimer Freiheit, the Mülheimer Freedom. At Mülheimer Strasse was where their studio was.
Mhm.
And they were just doing crazy stuff. They were kind of using stylistical approaches or art historical periods of art as material, you know, that was just another material. They weren't making cubist paintings, or, you know, but they would play with that idea. And they were painting as a collective. They were painting individually. They were trying all kinds of radical experiments, and all of them were classically trained, you know. So, but I was really excited about what they were doing. And WashU brought Wolfgang Max Faust over as a visiting artist, who he had been the editor of Art Forum International. He had written the best-selling book on art criticism and theory in the history of books on art criticism and theory. And so he was a
hot shot,
and he was awesome. They sent me, I had applied for this to go, you know, to Cologne. And when I realized it looked like I was going to get it, I audited 2 semesters of German, you know, just because I'm like, oh, so I could say, like, what kind of cheese is that? But they sent me to the airport, you know, to pick up Max Faust, and I only knew his writing, which was brilliant. I'm imagining like a large balding man with a monocle or something, and you know, this tiny handsome gay man in a leather jacket with a Mickey Mouse pen. I'm holding a sign that says, you know, Dr. Faust, and he's like, hello. Like, oh my God, wow. But he was, you know, he was awesome. We became good friends. He was, you know, he went out of his way to get to know a lot of the graduate students. He came visited our studios, and, you know,
and he spoke English?
He wrote art criticism in something like 8 languages.
Oh my goodness gracious.
He spoke English beautifully.
Yeah. Beautifully.
Along with
a lot of other languages.
Italian, French, you know, along with anything else you can imagine. connection. So he was really, he's passed away now, which was
Yeah.
it saddened me. But he became a really good friend, and he was instrumental in making making all of this happen.
So how did your experience in Germany affect your art, or affect you even?
Well, it affected me profoundly. It's an odd thing to be an outsider,
Mm-hmm.
culturally an outsider in a place where you look just like everyone else. People thought I was everywhere I went. People thought I was German, and if they guessed anything else, they thought Norwegian or Dutch. So it was very weird to be in a place where you couldn't understand. It took a while to get to where you could understand, and you felt out of place, but you just blended in so perfectly. Everyone assumed you were one of them until you
Opened your
Until
mouth.
you
Opened your mouth or did,
and was looking for that
yeah,
cheese.
until you did, just some little thing like that. So it was fascinating to, struggling with learning another language, being in this radically different culture. And the art, it was the 80s, the art world in America, it was the Reagan, Andy Warhol was the
Yeah,
most popular
that's right.
artist in America during the Reagan years. That is surreal. That's crazy right there. But American art seemed much more, I'll use the term superficial, not as a slam, but about what it looked like.
Right.
And German art was way more conceptual in the sense that it was about what it was about instead of just how it appeared. And so, that was a fascinating thing. That was, and WashU had also had a British sculptor come in as a visiting artist, David Nash, whom I got to know. I was the master printer's assistant. So when a visiting artist came in, we'd do like an edition of lithographs, and David and I got to be friends. And he's like, well, if you ever find yourself in Europe, look me up. And it's like, well,
Why is
guess
his name
what?
familiar? David Nash.
Andy Goldsworthy, who's got, a huge, the Stone Sea at the Art Museum, and has,
Right.
he was David's student, but he's like surpassed him in terms of, the art world notoriety. But so I got to both live in Cologne on this fellowship and then travel to a place called Blaenau Festiniog in Wales, which means the end of the line, because it's where it's way up on a mountain. It's where the train tracks change gauges. So there's
Right.
no longer passenger trains, just like mining,
Right.
coal or slate was what was being mined there. But so, it was awesome to get to bounce between these two radically different environments. But, even in England, I'm culturally an outsider, yeah.
So you also spent time at the Virginia Center and the Santa Fe Institute. How
Yeah.
did that influence your work?
Well-
Because that's very different from being in Germany.
Very.
I mean, we're talking, worlds away.
Well, so the VCCA, Virginia, and Santa Fe Art Institute, these things they're all over the world. There are these artist residencies. They're competitive. You apply, and generally, so you can go and you don't have any of the worries of the world. So it's a weird experience, because you're fed, you're housed, you have a studio, it's kind of like being a graduate student all over again, but
with benefits.
Well, and we're older, so, but generally speaking, these things are, they run 1 to 3 months. And I'm bring that up because the first book, Rivers and Beasts,
Right.
this was made at an artist residency only 100 miles from here, where I thought I was going for 3 months, and then that became 6 months, and then it became 9 months. And because they had all these properties, they had a gallery in town that they didn't know quite what to do with, and I'm like, well, I can bring you artists, from other places. So this book, yeah.
You see?
Yeah, these are, well, and we broke this book into 4 kind of chapters or sections. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But usually any artist residency, if you're there for a month to 3 months, it's the work you do after you leave there that, like you're experimenting and trying all these things. And then when you get back and get grounded in your studio, that's when the real shift happens. But this experience being, ending up being there for that. This book came out when I think it was published when I'd been there for 29 months. And I thought I was going for 3, Well, it's just, so this was the one artist residency I've been to that where, the shift in my practice and thinking and everything took place while I was there, because damn it, I was there so long. It was just like, and it's only 100 miles away from here, but it could have been Botswana. It's 8 miles to the nearest gas station, from the farm, the primary property of the residency, right on the Gasconade River. And the day I got there, I text, it's like Siri says, you have arrived. And I'm like, I think I'm here. And the guy who runs it is like, so are you at the little White House down by the river? And I'm like, no, but do I just keep driving? And he goes, what are you driving? And I think he wants to identify my car. So I'm like, a white Dodge Caravan. And the next message I got from him is, yeah, I think that'll make it. And I'm like, wait. So, you go a mile. Well, you drive a mile down this windy gravel road and you're seeing like private property, beware of dogs. I'm like, man, I hope I'm in the right place. Because
I got myself into.
Well, I grew up in the country. You don't roll up on nobody. These folks have guns and backhoes. Like they can hide a body. So I was like, man, I just, I didn't.
Reminds me of a previous interview we did.
Yeah. But then for me, being this kid who had grown up kind of, playing in the woods and everything, man, but and by White House, he meant this was a shack and it had been wrapped in Tyvek in about 1960. And that, so the Tyvek was all stringy and blew in the wind and snakes and lizards crawled up under it to get in the shed, So white was not how I would describe this house, but it had a great big deck that overlooked the Gasconade River. I was like, wow, I can make this work, for.
Well, tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, okay,
what inspired you to do this book?
I have asked myself that question many times. Because, it was a bear to pull off, but actually, I kind of got talked into it. This is like,
okay.
Okay. Yeah. I'd been in magazines and I'd had, things like, this is like an exhibition catalog. So, I had done, I'd done things like this, but I'd never thought of myself as like, publishing a book.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got to this place,
this was done in 2017.
2017 was its initial, first run.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a project that's now 21 years old. The catalog here. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just like a little flip book.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. I didn't think of this as a book. It was a catalog. It was a document of an exhibition. Well, of a single exhibition.
Right. But this is a book.
It is, and so Aaron Fine, who was at the time the head of the art department at Truman State University, wrote a beautiful little essay. Lisa Halley Melching, who's a photographer and digital graphic artist, did all the layout. She worked. Yeah. So yeah, this book has 61 paintings that were all made over the course of these like 27 months. And my practice shifted so radically when I got to this place, because I'd had a full-time job and a teenage daughter, so I was doing this kind of generative system-based work that was it was about repetition, sequence, and dispersal. But it did amazing. Like you never really knew exactly where a lot of people compared it to DNA, or it was very pattern like.
Yes. Because if you take a look at it, you can
Yeah,
see
there's a
that.
couple. Well, there's a couple in there at the very
yes.
beginning, and I thought I'd go out to this residency and flip a switch and just go. Yeah,
See,
I thought I'd
this is
just
one
go
of them.
right back to it. But when I found myself out there with nothing else to do but paint and wander in the woods,
See,
and
that, that
yeah,
would be one of them, right?
yeah,
there.
so these were really early, things
Right.
made.
This one is called the Mechanics of Loneliness. Yeah, that's what this
When
one's
you-
called.
When you
Looks like
find
something from Oak Ridge.
well, but when you find yourself, in a cabin overlooking a river, having conversation with the pack of dogs that lives there, because there's hardly it. Yeah, that's
Here's another one.
Yeah, these repetitive. So this, a lot of people compared this to like DNA or
Origins of the Species.
yeah, a code is simply a pattern that can be interpreted. That's like, and our brains seem wired to find patterns
Everywhere.
even when they're not there.
Even when they're not there,
So
yeah.
but so this, when I got there, the other residents were artists in multiple disciplines. There were painters, dancers, but by the time this happened, everybody was a poet. And poets, kind of measured their lives in books the way artists measure their lives in exhibitions. Or
Right.
so the director of the residency is like, well, what if we do a book of all the paintings that you've made here? And so this started but then it's like, well, let's make it a coffee table book, and let's make it a hardback book, and let's do it. So this, this went from like $7 or $8 a copy to like $28 a copy, and by the time it was done, it's like, well, so if I sell one book, that basically pays to print one more book, and nobody makes $1, not me, not the publisher, this is like, I'm not a math major either, but
we are at the time when we have to break for commercial, and we will be back to finish this story.
El Potro Restaurant and Market, located at 6920 Manchester Avenue, 1 block east of McCausland, offers the finest variety of Mexican and Central American groceries and goods. El Potro Restaurant serves authentic Mexican and Central American cuisine, including daily specials, not to mention the best horchata and tastiest margaritas in St. Louis. Open 7 days a week. El Potro, 6920 Manchester Avenue, 1 block east of McCausland.
The United States has a strong tradition of welcoming newcomers and refugees. The Welcome Corps is a new service opportunity for Americans inspired to welcome those seeking freedom and safety, and in turn help strengthen their own communities. Welcome Corps is a public-private partnership that is inspired by what Americans represent to so many around the world, a beacon of hope and refuge. All it takes is a helping hand. Are you ready to learn more? Contact the International Institute of St. Louis at info@iistl.org or call 314-773-9090. That's info@iistl.org or call 314-773-9090. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision was a major legal event and catalyst that contributed to the Civil War. The decision declared that Dred Scott could not be free because he was not a citizen. The 14th Amendment, also called the Dred Scott Amendment, granted citizenship to all born or naturalized here in our country and was intended to overturn the U.S. Supreme Court decision on July 9, 1868. The Dred Scott Heritage Foundation is requesting a commemorative stamp to be issued from the U.S. Postal Service to recognize and remember the heritage of this amendment by issuing a stamp with the likeness of the man Dred Scott. But we need your support and the support of thousands of people who would like to see this happen. To achieve this goal, we ask you to download, sign, and share the one-page petition with others. To find the petition, please go to dredscottlives.org and click on the Dred Scott Petition Drive on the right side of the page.
And we're back. Okay, so We have a quote. Bob, you want to give us the quote? You're not on my. Why aren't you on the same page as me?
Because
You're never on the same page with me. What is it with you and not being on the same page as me?
Because I was looking for the marketing tips here.
Oh, you were looking for the marketing.
But
let's just go to the
Yeah.
quote.
the quote is, "The visible is not that which is invisible, and which we revere, but neither is it cut off from the invisible. Rivers and Beasts is a meditation on that reality, not as something considered separately from our lives, but as the visible form that contains the invisible content of our existence. The visible is simply the invisible making itself known to us." That's from Aaron Fine in 2017.
That's the synopsized version of the last paragraph of his essay, the essay which he graciously wrote for the publication of this book. Aaron and I had been residents together. He had come there twice while I was there, but for like 2 months at a time. But we had become pretty good friends, and he was very familiar with the work I was making. He'd watched this stuff. He'd seen this shift in my practice take place. So, and Aaron is I think Aaron's third or fourth book is coming out this year. He's written about color theory primarily, and now he's writing about perspective. So he was a lovely writer, and I really appreciated him, jumping on
board.
this.
Well,
Yeah.
explain that. The visible is not that which is invisible.
Well, if I may here, he's, I mean, it's taken from, he's referencing here, where's the essay's way at the beginning of this thing, but he's referencing some, he says, easily a majority of the world's philosophical and religious frameworks disparage the senses and the world they depict as less real or good than some higher or more perfect reality. That Christianity, Islam, the world is kind of bad and sinful, but this, the invisible, this unattainable, heightened, the reality that we all strive for is what's more important. And so he's using, he quotes someone from the Sufi who says that, that yes, the invisible is what we, revere, but the visible is also noble. And I think his point was just that, because this work is very formal and very abstract. And, he was like, I wasn't depicting anything, but it was all this work was based on really, direct interaction with this environment, this landscape, all these people. And so, he was like that, the color green, could
it's what it elicits from you.
Yeah.
It's what it elicits from you.
And so these were, formal abstraction. Well, I guess I can talk about that a little bit now. That when I got there, I'd been doing this really generative system driven work. I earlier in my career, I had carved a lot of wood. I'd had a studio out in the middle of nowhere and worked with a lot of found forms. And so a lot of these things reference the human form and sort of the human condition. But, the adage that, all artwork is self-portraiture. So after a while, I started to feel, I was uncomfortable with how, I didn't want to just personal. I thought I'd used all the means I had to address my personal narrative without getting sappy or, I didn't want the work to be about, oh, Greg's happy now. Oh, Greg's really unhappy now. So that, this generative system work had been, one of the aspects of that was that it removed personal narrative, from the work. But, when I was just this 20-something, 20-year-old kid and studying art at the University of Tennessee, abstraction, like abstraction. That was the hell. I could draw stuff. I didn't even know what that. I didn't understand. How can these two colors? How can just the contrast between these two colors or these two weird forms? How can it say so much? That didn't make any sense. I had to.
Right.
So I played with all these formally abstract ideas and was influenced by all these artists that I'd never heard of or seen. But, I didn't have a very big tool basket, and so, all this stuff, hell, I was 58 or 9 when I moved to this, when I moved to this residency.
Right.
So it's not like I felt way more confident, but I just felt a whole lot less self-conscious. Why not make a mess? Who cares? Why not?
Less ego.
Well, yeah, and I had, hilariously, thank God I had all this paper, because man, if I'd made, I made 250 paintings probably by the end of this thing, and if they'd all been big paintings on canvas, I'd have had to burn them, I think. So, but I had $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 worth of paper and sheet. Some of these things up to like 48 by 62 inches.
They're huge.
So I was just, I was just cranking away and making all kinds of crazy things there. And Aaron, but in many ways, I felt like I was returning to a lot of the ideas I struggled with as a 20-year-old art student, but with a little more wisdom, a lot more tricks, a lot less self-consciousness, and so it was like, wow, yeah. So it was like all of this is a discovery. This is like, and you could take things from, I was taking things like there's, we broke down this book into 4 chapters, and
right.
Well, one is called Up on a Hill, or The Color Purple, because I was playing with process pigments, which are pigments that aren't found in nature. They're laboratory produced, and they're just insanely bright, insanely pinks and purples. And I thought I was working with this artificial color sense until I'd sit on my porch, with a beer and a cigar and watch the sunset. And I'm like, damn, that's
purple.
All those pinks and purples,
Wow.
all that stuff is right there. I didn't even
Right.
realize that's where I was.
That's where your brain was going.
Getting this stuff from. But yeah, so this book, it started with, why don't we do a book of all the paintings that you've been making? And then, it just grew into, well, it should really be broken into these 4 segments, that the work's all interrelated.
Right.
And
so what are the chapters of the 4
all right,
books?
this is how if I may, can I
Yes.
read a little?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
This is awesome. And this is I guess that's visible now. I mean, this we used as like
can you see that?
Am I on camera here?
Yes.
Okay.
All
Yeah,
right.
this mimosa tree was right outside my
That's
studio.
beautiful.
So it's one of the last paintings in the book is called "I Used to Think You Were Beautiful," and it's a vicious title, and people thought it was about like a relationship. But in bloom, this tree was gorgeous. In the winter time, it looked like it belonged in the haunted forest surround. It was all
Yes.
yeah. But if I may, then there's a couple of little things I'll read. I wrote, it's funny. I never thought of myself as a writer. I've joked that that's one of the reasons I studied visual art is my poetry sucked. So, I was such a terrible, as an artist, you're very frequently asked to discuss your work. And that's another, I think that's something that one grows into, because, you can't, it's so easy to freak out about how you sound and what you're saying. And
Right.
And I feel like I've just grown way more comfortable with that now that that used to drive me nuts. But so here's the little, if I may, this
Yes.
is what I wrote.
Now, I also want to make sure we have time for After the Flood.
Yeah,
too.
well, it's a in some ways a less consequential book for me,
Okay.
but we'll get to it. So here, this is called Of Rivers and Bees.
Okay.
On April Fool's Day, 2015, I turned in the keys to my former home and studio and set out for Osage Arts Community, an arts retreat on a 180-acre farm in southern Missouri. situated on the Gasconade River. So I'd signed a contract to be an artist in residence there for 3 months and planned to figure the rest of my life out from there. 3 months became 6, 6 became 9, 9 became 18. The paintings presented here were all made during a residency, which is currently in its 29th month. In laying out these paintings, I quickly abandoned the idea of a simple chronological order. That kind of straight line structure conveyed a false impression that this work had evolved and was produced at some steady or constant rate. A more accurate vision of this work's evolution looks much more like the river itself. There are places where things flow smoothly and the surface appears calm and clear. There are points at which things constrain, forming rough rapids and shallow eddies, where ideas circle endlessly back on themselves. And there are moments where things simply overflow their banks, with paintings spilling from tables and flooding the walls. At times, a painting I've struggled with for months has been saved through such a small act as the addition of a single brushstroke, or simply by turning it upside down. I decided to present these works in 4 sections or chapters, designated either by specific studio location or by an event large and forceful enough to define my experience for a period of months. I hope this provides context to the works presented. So the 4 sections are The River House, Up on a Hill, or The Color Purple, After the Flood, and Lost in the Forest, or Do Not Drive into Smoke. Do not drive into smoke is a highway sign in rural Missouri and Oklahoma. Do not drive it. If you see, if there's a forest fire, turn around. So do not. And then the last thing I said, the distance between OAC and my former live work space in downtown St. Louis is barely 100 miles. But the experience of spending 30 plus months in this wild, mutable, experimental, and transformative place feels like far greater distances have been traveled. So
wow.
And so we broke it into, well, if I'm, may I?
Sure.
Okay. Once we finally got this thing was such a bear. I didn't know what print on demand meant. So we'd get it all.
It was an experience, was it not?
Oh my God, we get it all put together. We'd send it off for a proof. And we get a perfect proof, and we'd order books. And then they'd come in just messed up in ways I didn't even know. Like every left-hand page is blank, or every purple, magenta's been pumped up to such a level that anything pink, even text, had a haze around it. I mean, it's like, what the? And I remember saying, like, the proofs are perfect, and they go, well, we can't guarantee. It's like, well, then it's not. What's the point of a proof?
What's the point of having a proof?
You can give me one perfect book, but you can't say, well, I'll give you, a few hundred at a time. It was like, that was nuts. So we set up all these, like, events, like so at some point I felt like I had to write something for these. And if I may, so this I wrote a little bit after, a few months after this. It's called On Rivers and Beasts. People have asked me about the title of this book. Some say the title sounds bucolic and pastoral, but the paintings within are formal, abstract, and bear little reference to landscape. The paintings collected here are not depictions of place, but they are all interactions with a specific place, one both singular and constantly shifting. In truth, OAC, Osage Arts Community, has only one river, the Gasconade, but she has many faces and is lord and master of this domain. I've floated her in summer when she was lazy, shallow, and bathtub warm. I've seen her the color of day-old coffee, as green as a green glass bottle, and so clear you can see from the porch the mussel shells littering her floor. I've also seen her raise up over 40 feet out of her banks, swallowing farmland, forcing her way into houses, and dragging 60-foot trees with her as she roars unstoppably on. As to beasts, for 27 months, I was surrounded by poets, publishers, pranksters, performers, professors, and posers, musicians, critics, writers of young adult fiction, those who cook and those who will not, intellectuals, idiots, vegetarians, vegans, and ribald eaters of meat, alcoholics, teetotalers, the timid and shameless self-promoters, as well as woodpeckers, flycatchers, eagles, osprey, and hawks, herons, kingfishers, and owls that howl, bobcats, river otters, armadillos, fleet foxes, sneaky skunks, and so many deer that driving can at times be hazardous. More insects, arachnids, and arthropods than one might even believe, snakes, turtles, and frogs, goats, chickens, and hogs, and the cattle and the dogs that had become a part of most residents' daily lives. I've simply been another beast on the river.
Wow.
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 I love it.
Well,
Yeah.
because everybody kept asking me, like, well, it sounds like they're landscape paintings. I'm like, no,
They're not.
they're
No.
not.
No,
So,
they are
yeah.
not. Now, you've done another book,
Yes.
After the Flood. Okay? Tell us about that.
I think in hindsight, I think I was offered to publish this book because the publisher felt so sorry for the experience I had.
So you've traditionally published, am I correct?
But what do you mean?
Traditionally, in other words, you had a publisher.
Yeah,
do it for you.
I mean, the self-published thing is like they're in the art world. There are galleries that you pay to show your work in,
Uh-huh.
and like, no, thank you. I mean, I probably get 2 advertisements a month from a gallery saying, for just this amount of euros or whatever, we'll exhibit your work in London. Like, yeah, I don't think so.
Let me read this radio identifier
Please do.
before we start on the other book.
By
here.
all means. Yeah.
All right. You're listening to Author's Edge with Guy L. Freer and Bob Price, coming to you weekly on Saturdays at 10 a.m. on KWRH 92.9 and KXOK 102.9 FM, and Monday to Friday, 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. nationwide on the My Genre Radio Network. You can also view the latest videos or past shows at authors-edge.com online and download valuable information on marketing and publishing. But we're here with Greg, and we were just going to start on the book that is called After the Flood.
Right. You're going to tell us all about that.
Oh, shucks. Well, I can hold it up to the camera here. So
Yeah.
that I honestly think, the publisher of this was like, oh God, I just want to see you have a book that works easily and smoothly. So I had, at the end of this book, I felt, it's a weird thing as an artist. I'm sure this is the same for a lot of other, many people who work in the arts at all, but it's your project by project. And at the end of one thing, you're like spent. So I'll kind of roar through this. I had a tiny little watercolor tablet that was really about the size of this book. And just when I got lost, I just started screwing, I was just screwing around. And so these were really simple ideas, and they were done really quickly, but I wasn't thinking of them as any kind of collection but the publisher was like, well, how about let's publish those, and then let's get a bunch of poets, to contribute things. So
you worked with poets along with your paintings.
Well, I had made the paintings by this point. That the publisher was there in residence as well. So she just saw these things. She'd come in my studio, and this stuff is pinned all, has all been up on the wall. So, and I felt like after the flood, like this, when this was done, like we'd all this stuff had to be, perfectly photographed. And so all the finished work was like put away, and my walls were bare. The floor of the studio was like covered with scraps and, ideas that had been abandoned. And it's like, I was lost, it's not like I couldn't move, but I didn't know which direction went where. So I didn't have a compass or a map, it was like, which direction is home? How do I get back?
What do I do now?
So that's what these little, that's what these goofy little things were. And it wasn't even planned, but the very first one is called 1st of October. And it was painted on the first day of October, in 2017, right? Shortly after this thing. And so all of these little tiny paintings were made between October of 2017 and October of 2018. And it was early 2019, I think, when Stubborn Mule Press said, hey, how about, I know some poets. And it's like, well, strangely enough, so do I. So, when everything at the residency, when everything shifted to poetry, they were going to have a big poetry event there. And I'm like, well, I've got a few friends, and say, I can bring you some St. Louis poets. And I'm not sure. I now feel like that was a good thing to do, like I did. But yeah, so we reached out. I mean, they're one of the contributing poets. I mean, it's like so many people.
How was it working with poets?
By this point, I was surrounded by poets. That's everyone at the residency was a poet. Everyone but me was a poet, which was like, holy shit. And people think artists are weird. I was like, man. Well, but I'm a cook. That I cook for fun. That's that.
You cook for fun.
Yeah, it relaxes me. Unless there's like 80 y'all. And you all show up at my house and go, so when's dinner? And then start drinking whiskey at my kitchen table and talking about what a drag publishing is, And I'm like, when I realized one night, while all this, like, I know the difference between a split, a chat book, and a full length, and I shouldn't know any of that shit. Like there's no reason on earth I should know what these things are. It's just because I've been listening to you guys forever. But working with people on this book was radically different. That was a lot of fun. We sent things back and forth, and many of the contributors are people that I'd either met at other artist residencies or had known.
Is there something you want to share with us?
In here, you mean?
Yes,
Yeah.
please do.
Well, I do. Well, I'll read. Well, I will. I'll pick one. Well, I tell you what, this one's almost frightening. So the way we laid it out too, we decided to put all the paintings at the beginning of the book.
Okay.
And then there are accompanying poems afterwards, but referencing, because we didn't want it seemed weirdly like the poems were going to appear to be illustrations for the paintings, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Right.
If we did it. So I'll read a couple. This one is by John Dorsey, who is still at Osage Tribes Community, and by this point he's probably published over 70 books of poetry. So that first painting in here was called 1st of October. This really happened. So this is a poem by John, kind of about me. Let me find it. Here we go. This poem, it's called At 59.
At 59.
At 59. Now, Greg talks about wasted years and missed opportunities. They used to pop up like the sunrise, he says, sipping a flat beer on his porch in the middle of winter in Missouri. In his head, he's a young man, watching the Berlin Wall go down on a busted black and white TV, imagining the future while searching for bones to place on canvas in the rubble. He crushes a dead leaf, scattering its ashes in the snow. Summer will be here before you know it, he says, and the sun will be blood red with redemption. I cried the first time I saw that,
Wow.
Written. Can I read a...
Sure.
One, I mean, there's
Please.
Stephanie Russell. Do you?
No.
She no longer lives in St. Louis. She's based in New Orleans right now, but she's Nolans. Yeah. She's from Salt Lake City, I think. So, but we had become friends over the course of
That's a culture change.
how it is. Well, so she wrote, so it's not one poem per painting. There's some paintings that like 3 people want to write. So she wrote another 1st of October poem. And if you don't know what a Hercules beetle is, Google it. It's the largest and heaviest beetle in North America. It's the size of a matchbox car. So
Wow.
that's good to know. Here we are in the cicada summer, but a Hercules beetle is truly an impressive thing. So this is her poem, 1st of October. When your father says wild water, he doesn't mean fast-moving water. When he says wild light, he doesn't mean the speed of light. We walked in the woods, his great-grandma's snuff box tucked under his arm. He caught a Hercules and closed the lid. We listened to its horn ticking against the tin. He said, don't try to scry those patterns on its back. That's a bit of parchment you don't want to read. Just know you live in the kind of world where something like that can fly. I thought that was,
Wow.
again, so it was so much fun to work with these people. These are,
Now, you also did another book called Dark Matter.
no, but this is Dark Matter is what I would, so
Okay, so you also talk about collaborating with physicists.
Agnes Wojta.
Yes.
And please let me,
I don't
this-
want to, I don't, you gave me some
This is
information about
hilarious.
stuff, and I want to make sure we include it
it's
all.
hilarious how this happened. So I was approached about doing this. Let's bring all these, and I was like, this is cool. So then Agnes Wojta, she's a physicist and a poet.
Because we have 5 minutes.
Oh God. Well, she was not a resident there, but she, got involved with all the poetry stuff. So she was constantly coming to my studio, and unbeknownst to me, she was writing poems about my paintings. So I would have put her in this book, but so we did a little show right as I was leaving the residency, and she comes up and she's like, so would it be okay if I read the poems I've written about your paintings at the opening? I'm like, hell yeah. But like that's, we are hoping to publish something over the pandemic. I did a series of paintings all on black Arches cover, a super cold black printmaking paper. So it's designed to be soaked, so you just can't get it too wet. So I was playing around with high-end gouaches, but it was through the pandemic. It was called Dark Matter. But so I was posting these just on social media, and she was seeing the posts and then writing poems about them. So we've got, there's 47 paintings. I don't know how many poems, but if I may, then I did a show in Kansas City in 2019 called Sisyphus Calls It Quits, which is a lie. I never did, but I made a painting, and that ended up being the title of it. And this is the first of Agnes's poems that so if I may, and it's in her book,
Let's
The
hear it.
Eden of
Let's hear
Perhaps.
it.
Sisyphus calls it quits. To walk away from what was your purpose for all this time, to simply let the boulder lie and say, I'm punished enough. To turn your back and not stay any longer with the impossible is the impossible. We've imagined you happy with the struggle towards the height, or rather tried to imagine how it could have filled your heart. Now depart from the mountain without backward glance and dance on the bones of the gods who never deserved your obedience in the first place. And I was like, holy
Wow.
crap. Well, there's a painting called Laying Old Ghost to Rest, and I won't butcher it, but her poem is, they're done with you too.
We are there.
Okay.
We are there. So how can people get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with you?
GregEdmondson.net.
Greg Edmonds.
GregEdmondson.net. You can get me there.
Okay. And
yeah.
your books are on Amazon?
Amazon, any of the, but probably the sanest thing to do would be to reach out to Stubborn Mule Press and Spartan Press. You probably get a better price going straight through the publisher. So they're both
Okay.
online, and yeah.
All righty.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
shucks. Thank you,
That
guys.
has been wonderful
Well,
chatting with you, Greg.
My pleasure.
And do you have another project coming up?
Well, hopefully someone will agree to publish our collection of Dark Matter paintings and poems. That's what
Okay.
Agnes and I are working
Thank you
toward.
for tuning in to Author's Edge. Tune in again next week for more tips, resources, and your favorite conversations. Our next guest will be Greg Stout, and we will be chatting about his newest book, Long Time Gone, which is part of his series featuring P.I. Jackson Campbell.
Are you going to See us at the Inkwell.
And we'll see you at the Inkwell. Till then, see you around the Inkwell. Miss that.